Sorry, we're late. I'm Derrick Day, and he is.
I'm Aaron Tomlinson.
So, Aaron, how are you today, man?
I'm doing great, man. I'm glad to be here as always and looking forward to our topic. How are you doing?
Man, I'm actually doing pretty good. It's been a good week, and I'm looking forward to this weekend. I'm
Yeah,
going to try to do as little as possible, but I got stuff I need to do, but I'm going to try to do as little as I possibly can get away with.
yeah, that's good. That sounds
So,
great.
what is in the glass, my friend?
But I have a glass of bourbon tonight. Just I'm going hard, so
Okay.
that's it. That's it. Just bourbon on the rocks. What do you got?
Well, I'm doing old fashions tonight.
Yeah, I was
Just
gonna I was gonna do the old fashioned thing, but I'm trying to reach my health goals, and so I
and,
didn't want the sugar.
you know what, and it's funny that you mentioned that because like I started to say, well, I'll just drink straight scotch tonight, but I was like, nah, I'm gonna have a little sweet tonight, and
Yeah,
maybe over the weekend, and I'm gonna kick. I'll get back in gear on Monday, with the intermittent fasting,
yeah,
leaning more toward keto kind of thing,
mhm.
and getting back in the gym and um, whipping my ass back into shape. Is this funny thing? I got to share this with you, right?
Sure. Mhm.
That a lot of people on social media, when they finally realize that they can't, fuck with your position, they'll
Mhm.
start talking about your weight or your appearance or something
Right.
like that.
Yeah. No. Right.
And so, I want to be snarky and say, well, I can get in shape, but you can't fix your stupid, right? But I'm trying to be a kinder, gentler Derek. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
so I don't say that,
They
but it's a wake up call.
yeah, they go at me about my backgrounds because my backgrounds are not the best.
Wow.
Who cares?
Yep.
Or my lighting or my hair or some stupid shit.
Yeah. There's always something, right?
Mhm.
Always something. And one of the things that I'm learning, um, I had lunch this week with Carl and Laura
Oh,
Forehand,
nice.
which was really really cool.
Yeah, nice.
And the one thing that I've been working with Carl on is you know teaching him how to say fuck it, fuck you, fuck this, fuck that, and he's getting it. I'm loving it because Carl is I Carl Forehand. Okay, in this order, right? These are the nicest people that I know. Nicest people that I know, right?
Right.
And you're not one of them, by the way.
Well, I would hope
No,
not. I
hang
would
on,
be
hang
I
on.
would be very disappointed if I ended up in that list.
No, because see, here's the thing. You're one of my best friends. You're probably my best friend right now, right? But the thing is that you know you you you're no bullshit, right?
Yeah.
And so people that are nice tend to kind of I won't say they bullshit, but what they'll do is they'll taper off their baser thoughts, right?
Right.
So anyway,
You
my
don't have an
son Anthony, right? Kyle Butler and Carl
yeah.
Forehand. And those are the three nicest people those are, in my opinion, those are the three nicest human beings on the planet,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Because they just they're going to try to find the goodness, the niceness, and everything, right?
Right.
Um, but Carl is learning to tweak that a little bit.
Well,
it's, it's
he is, Derek,
good.
because I talked to him just last week or week before last. I can't remember if it was last Sunday or the Sunday before last, and he was making a point of telling me sometimes you just got to tell people to fuck off.
Yeah, it's and then
I
somebody
hope I didn't. Sorry if I outed you, Carl. I didn't mean to. Please forgive
no,
me.
but invariably somebody will say to Carl, "Oh, you've been fucking around with Derek too long."
Yeah, oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah, yeah. So it makes sense. So I'm like, oh, okay.
Yeah, because I am the F man.
Yes, yes.
I want to get like a Superman shirt that has a big F on
Yeah,
it instead of the S, right?
that would be pretty cool. That'd be pretty clever.
So, yeah. So, what's in my glass? I said old fashioned, right? Just and we talked about that. So today's subject. thinking about thinking,
Hmm.
right? And I love how you're able to, and this is something I think we both do for each other is that we help to clarify ideas, right?
Yeah.
So my thought came around this word metacognition,
Hmm.
metacognition, and and you said, well, how about calling it thinking about thinking? Because that's what metacognition is, literally. And so I've got this little slide here, and I'm going to share it, right? So what is meta? What does meta mean? When you hear something meta, metaform, metanoia, meta data, metaphysics, right? So meta is a prefix that means more comprehensive or transcending, and meta can also serve as a prefix meaning self-referential, as in a study or endeavor.
Hmm.
So when we're talking about metacognition, we're talking more about the latter, but the former also applies because it's transcending thought, but it's also data about thought. So like in my profession, we talk about metadata, right?
Hmm.
And metadata is data about data, right? So metacognition would be like data about cognition.
Hmm.
That's another way of looking at it. And I'm going to get to why this is so important in just a minute, but the second slide here is what is cognition? And this thing, anyway, hopefully you guys can see this, but cognition is the mental action or process of acquiring knowledge and understanding through thought, experience, and the senses. In other words, cognition is how we interface with consciousness,
Hmm.
if that makes sense.
Hmm.
And Aaron, because you're the psych guy here. If I get this wrong, make sure you
Doing
stop
great.
me and straighten me out.
Doing great.
Um, but but one of the things is that cognition, that's how we process data, how we process information, how we go about taking raw data and formulating that into some useful or useless conclusion, right?
Mhm.
And this is the thing where I want to kick this off is that most people, well, let me say this. A lot of people conflate consciousness with thinking, and they're not the same thing, right? Because consciousness is basically the radio is on, right?
Right.
You're ready to receive,
Right.
but thinking is actually dialing into a frequency.
Yep.
And in order to dial into that frequency, in order to think, this requires effort. It just doesn't happen on its own, right? And now what I want to do is I want to peel back the onion a little bit more because not only, first of all, people like you, Aaron, who are thinkers. I'm looking at all the thinkers. I see Jimmy Ligon out here. I see Ben Urban out here. Thinkers. When I think of thinkers, these guys are thinkers,
Yeah.
right?
For sure.
But in the realm of thinkers, the people who think about their thinking, the people that really consider and process their thinking or their thoughts is even rarer.
Hmm.
So here you have a lot of people that are basically operating with their limbic brain, with their lizard brain, going through life autonomically, right? Not really thinking about what they're doing. And don't get me wrong, I'm guilty of this. I've driven like from work to home, and I pull up in my driveway and wonder how the fuck did I get here?
Oh yeah. Sure.
Right? Or I'm in the house and I don't go upstairs very often. That's the kids' space. That's their zone. That's their planet, right? But every now and then I'll go up there and I'll stop and say, what the fuck am I doing up here? you know, because I've done something autonomically without really thinking about it. But and this is what I want to say, and then I'm gonna kick it over to you, is that as people deconstruct from religion, from ideologies, from habits. I really believe that it is important not just to be a thinker, but to understand what it means to think about thinking in order to effectively deconstruct.
Mhm.
And that's where I'm going to kick it over to you.
Yeah, it's interesting because this term metacognition it's all we do in therapy, really, or it's all I do in therapy. There's lots of different ways to do therapy,
Yeah.
but that's where my main focus is working with this concept of metacognition when I'm working with a client. And then it's also in education because they've discovered that um, children can learn how to learn better if they practice some metacognition.
Yep.
And you can also learn to self-regulate better. But you're absolutely right. Most people don't think about their thinking. I heard a statistic. I have to take trainings, and so I'm taking a training on relationships, like uh, relationship systems type training, as part of my continuing education for my profession. And the topic of sexuality comes up, and they've done surveys that estimate that less than 10% of people really know what they like or want sexually. Most people just kind of fall in a relationship and negotiate those things, I guess. Lots of times they don't even negotiate them. It just sort of happens. They don't talk about it.
Yep.
And, that's it. But I thought, wow, less than 10%. And this fits so perfectly with this because the problem for most people is that we're operating on automatic pilot. We're just completely on autopilot all the time,
Yep.
and so identified with our outer world and so identified with our outer experiences that we, like you said, we don't even thinking about what's going on internally. Oftentimes not even aware of what's going on internally. And so, if you think about it this way, most of your world as a child, at least for the first 7 years, if not beyond that, most of your world is internally oriented. So children are developing their imagination. They're learning and creating neural pathways for life, things like language and walking, early on. But once they get past those early stages, they're all internally oriented. Imagination, what I think, their emotions. They're able to emote without getting stuck. I remember watching my two boys because they were so close in age together, how they would be laughing one minute, angry with each other the next, crying the
Mhm.
next, and then back to laughing. Like they didn't get stuck, and they weren't talking the next day about, well, you did this to me, they just, because completely internally oriented. But invariably in this life, you're going to experience pain. You're going to experience discomfort. You're going to experience trauma on some level as you're growing up. And especially, depending on the level of trauma, it's quite a shock to the system. So when you get into pre-adolescence, 10, 11, 12, kind of that age range, now all of a sudden you're internally oriented, but you've experienced enough pain and disappointment that you begin to look externally, you begin to look outside. What are the causes of these things?
Yep.
And you begin to focus in order to manage your inner life. You begin to focus on everything outside of you, because if I go to school because I'm wearing a shirt that I like or pants that I like, or I remember Elijah had a particular hoodie that he liked, and he went to school one day about 5th grade, and everybody must have made fun of him because he didn't want anything to do with that
With that hoodie.
anymore. So his focus became on conformity. I need to conform so that I'm not laughed at, so that I'm not disappointed and I'm not hurt, right? So there's a shift that takes place. And all this is happening so unconsciously that we literally become programmed throughout our lives, so that we're just operating on autopilot, and everything seems, what's the word I'm looking for? Intuitive. Of course it's this way. Why wouldn't it be this way? This is how it's always been before. And so then we start to manage our life through all these external things. So we meet people, like I meet you, find out, hey, you lived in Arizona and Phoenix,
Mhm.
and and we were there in 2016 and talk about places outside of us, right? So we started talking
Yep.
about places that we're from, and then experiences that we share in common. You were a former pastor in the Word of Faith / Grace movement. I was a former pastor in the Word of Faith / Grace movement. You're kind of a foodie. I'm a foodie. You like your drinks. I like the same kind of drinks.
Yep.
You see what I'm saying?
Yep.
And so pretty soon we've just developed this entire relationship with the world around us where our mind, it's really, I don't want to say controlled because that might be too strong of a word, but they're so linked together is what I'm trying to say. Like thought and the material stuff out here and experiences, they're so linked together, and it's so much on autopilot that people never take time to think about, to just step back and become aware of their thought processes, or even become aware of their bodies and what they're feeling in their bodies in terms of emotions. And so one of the first things that we have to do with clients oftentimes is develop awareness and say, okay, you need to be aware of how you're thinking. You need to become aware of how you're feeling as you move through your day. You know, you were doing fine and then you got depressed. Well, what changed in your environment that caused you to begin to feel depressed or anxious or whatever, bored, whatever the case may be, right?
Yep.
And so it's this process. Now, here's the thing. When you can take that meta, that step back, right? That self-referencing step back so that you reflect on how you're thinking, you reflect on how you're emoting. Now you're in a position of real power to change your life.
Yep.
Because you can't control the material stuff out there. Like I can't control if all of a sudden you were to, and I don't think you'd ever do this, it's just for illustration purposes only, but if you were all of a sudden to decide, that Aaron, I just can't stand that guy, you know, forget that guy. Yeah, I can't control that.
Yeah.
You know, if my wife suddenly decided that she was married to me, I wouldn't blame her. And she just walked out the door. I can't control that. But what I can control is the nature of my internal world and inner experience. So I'm saying all that not to say that, yes, we need to deconstruct. And I want to get into the deconstruction discussion of it because I think it's so crucial to it. But I also wanted to flesh it out a little bit more generally, if you will, as to how this thing can really help us and serve us in our lives.
Yeah, and you were talking about, like, you know, that using the meta as a step backward, and it's funny that you say that because that really helps crystallize the discussion a bit, right? Because a lot of times we're conditioned forward progress, forward progress, forward progress, right? Well, the meta causes us to take a step back so that we can look at it, you know, get a broader focus, right? Get a better purview of it, because sometimes we're too close to our situations to adequately process them.
Right.
Sometimes you need to take a step back so that you can have a more external view. And again, like where I'm thinking about this as far as like deconstruction goes, right? Well, first of all, let me share another slide. I'm going to put this up here, and this is basically like, you know, going through the why, the who, the what, and the how, right?
Right.
And so we've said this on the show. I refer to Simon Sinek a lot. You know, always start with why. Why is you know, basically why is the root of every root cause analysis, right? Because if you understand the why, you'll understand the who, you'll understand the what, you'll understand the how. But why is important. So when we have a thought, we have to ask, why am I having this thought? And so you were talking about things that are out of our control, like the Stephen Covey rule, right? That life is 90% or 10% what happens to you and 90% how you react to it, right?
Right.
So there are things that are environmental. There are things that are societal. There are things that are systematic that you have absolutely no control over.
Right.
These things are going to happen whether you show up or not. But
Right.
how do you react, right? So one of the things that you look at is you say, okay, why am I having the thought? So if I can use our, some biblical stuff for a minute, right?
Sure.
That we would say to people when we were back in the day preaching and counseling, right? We'd say you have to take every thought captive and bring it into the obedience of Jesus Christ, right?
Right.
So it's like, why am I having the thought? Am I dealing with something lustful? Am I dealing with something covetous? Am I dealing with something angry or something? Are there any negative roots to the thought? And those negative things, the negative approaches and positive approaches to the thought, you have 100% control over, right?
Mhm.
Because you can, like, I'll give you an example. Like, right now we're going through a political turmoil. The first president that's been indicted on criminal charges, and so there are many different thoughts
Right.
associated with this, right? and
Right.
and so you have to say, okay, if I think Trump is guilty, why do I think he's guilty? Why do
Right.
I think that he should be indicted, tried and convicted? If I think he's innocent, why do I think that this is a witch hunt and that he's being persecuted unfairly? Why do I think that? Or if I think, well, maybe we should at least look at this. Why should we look at it? And so why am I having these thoughts? Or we have this submarine wreck, and
Yeah.
and I really and let me say this while I'm here, my heart really goes out to the people who lost someone. My heart goes out to the people that actually died in that. I mean, because this is one of these things where nobody really had to die, you
Right.
know. But there are people that are mocking it, right? Because the whole eat the rich thing, and don't get me wrong, I'm on the eat the rich thing, but I don't think that anybody should die, right?
Right.
I'm not that cruel, that ruthless, right? And even though I frequently say play stupid games, you win stupid prizes, this is not one of those things. So I say, okay, so the people who are rejoicing over these people dying, why are you having that thought? And the people who are saying, well, you people that are saying this, that you're just really awful people. Well, they're not always awful people. Some of them just have a dark sense of humor, but why are you having that thought? So we start with why. Why is the important thing? Because if we don't get that settled, and so what I'm saying is the why is bringing the thought into captivity. And who do
Right.
you bring the thought into captivity to? To yourself, to your
Right.
own reasoning, to your own understanding. And sometimes your own reasoning, your own understanding, you have to accept the fact that sometimes your reasoning, your information is insufficient, and that you have to go externally to find better information, because you might look at, if you're really introspective, you'll look at your own information and say, I really don't have all the facts. I need to go out and build out my fact matrix a little bit better, right?
Right. Right.
So the second thing is the who. Who do my thoughts impact? And this is a big one, because first of all, you say to thine own self be true, which is something that people quote as in the Bible, which is not in the Bible, but
Right.
they'll say it all. To thine own self be true. So first of all, is this thought impacting or influencing or informing me in a positive or negative way? Is it
Right.
impacting, influencing, or informing others in a positive or negative way? Who are the people that are being impacted? Does this just impact me? Does this impact my family, my coworkers, my neighbors? Where does this thought go? Right? And,
Right.
and who
Right.
is it? Who is it touching? And then the what, right? What does this accomplish? Oh, if I have a thought, is this palpitating some situation, assessing some pain point? Is this trying to understand something, or is this just Is this bomb throwing, right? Or is this something that is it healing or is it harmful? Is it
Mhm.
helpful or is it useless? Those kind of things. And then finally, the how. How do I use this thought? Right? Because you have to understand that your thoughts are the raw materials that everything that you do, everything that you have comes from. Everything that you do, everything that you have, everything that you accomplish, everything that you share, every fucking thing comes from a thought, right?
Mm.
So
Right.
so I want to say, how does this thought reframe, reshape my thinking? How does this thought reframe, reshape others? Am I using my influence for good, or am I using
Right.
it for evil, for lack of a better term? And so those are the things that I just wanted to cover that on this slide, and I'm going to kick it over to you because I could just keep running my mouth on this for.
No, that's great stuff. That's a great template to begin practicing metacognition, right? It's a great template to um, sit back and go deeper than just, okay, knowing what I'm thinking. Like that's step one, okay, I had this thought, but to just stop and realize just because I had this thought doesn't mean it's right. Just because I had this thought, and by right, I mean correct, accurate. Um, just because I had this thought doesn't mean it's accurate. Excuse me. Doesn't mean that I want to follow it. Doesn't mean that it's going to lead to a good outcome for me in my choices
Mhm.
or in my life. And so, um, being able to recognize the thought is the first thing, right? And then also being able to take that meta stance again, that stepping back. So now you're thinking about the thinker, if that makes
Yep.
sense. Like to be the observer. It's like a conversation, right? I'm not identifying as the speaker of the thought internally. I'm identifying as the hearer of this thought, or the viewer of this thought, or the feeler of this feeling, viewer of this thought, viewer of this like imagination or image, whatever I have, right?
Yep.
So once I step back from that, now I can work with it, and I can work with it any number of ways. And so that slide, why am I having this thought? That might take a while.
Yep.
Because what the why question does, well, why is a tricky thing? Well, why when it comes to cognitions, why is a tricky question? Because if asked appropriately, it can really benefit you by putting you in touch with your assumptions that you didn't even know that you had,
Yep. That's a good point.
and really raise your awareness about yourself. Or it can start the mind on this self-justifying path that can lead you deeper into your assumptions. So if you ever notice when you're correcting your kids when they were little, oftentimes we say, "Why did you do that?"
Yep.
And what do they do? Their mind goes on a search. Well, why did I do that?
Yeah.
And oftentimes it's not productive, as many of us parents know, because it leads to all kinds of justifications, which then leads to this false idea in relationships that as long as your intention was okay, as long as you can justify your actions, as long as you can answer the why you did what you did, it's all good.
Yep.
And it doesn't matter if I go outside, smoke a cigar, and flick some ashes and burn my tree down, and it crashes into my house because I tossed it carelessly while I was walking out, or if I go take a flame torch to it, right,
Yep.
and do it on purpose.
Yep.
Doesn't matter. The damage is still exactly the same. The why I did it has no bearing on it whatsoever in terms of the outcome and the damage. Does that make
Yep.
sense? And so I always tell my kids, just a little tip for maybe younger parents out there like Ben, and try this out and let me know what you think. And maybe you picked up on this too, Derrick. But I tell my kids now, uh, you know, if I tell them to do something and they don't do it, I don't say, "Why didn't you do that?" Or I tell them to do something, they do the opposite. "Why did you do that?" "I just told you not to do that." I say, "What did I tell you to do?" And they repeat it back to me. And then I say, "And what are you doing?"
Yep.
And that kind of ends the conversation right there, right?
Yep.
So that the why one is tricky because in this case, it's not connected to purpose or reasons, in a healthy way.
Yep.
But but if asked appropriately, why am I doing this? And why will almost always put you in touch with your values.
That's it. That's
Put you in
exactly
touch
it.
with your values. And most people don't even ever identify their values. What's important to me? Why is this important to me? What does this give me? And if that's important to me, why is you can just keep going with that question.
Yep.
Um, and so it can put you in touch with your values, which you're oftentimes not conscious of. And your values are tricky because your values may not even be authentic to you.
Ooh.
Your values can be something that was programmed into you by family, by community, by culture, by media, by friends that you just picked up along the way. Remember what I said about Elijah's
Hmm. The hoodie.
the hoodie, right? Like he valued it, and it was very colorful, and it stood out, and he loved it. So that's a true value. And then he goes to school, and apparently something happens, and he never wears that hoodie again. And now he dresses in mostly tamed down like blacks and grays, which is there's nothing wrong with blacks and grays. I'm just showing the contrast, right?
Yep.
Like to make sure he doesn't stand out now. So that's a value that he assimilated from culture.
Yep.
Make sense?
Yep.
And so we can end up living with this programming our entire lives and live a miserable life because we've never clarified our values. When it comes to deconstruction,
Yeah.
and I'm spending way too much time on the why question, but when it comes to deconstruction, why do I believe this? Well, now I have to get in touch with my assumptions because the Bible says it's true, and I assume that the Bible is the Word of God. I mean, it amazes me that for 20 years I never thought about how did we get the Bible,
Yep.
not very deeply, and yet assumed that because the Bible said it, that was a commandment straight from God, right to me, right?
Yep.
So that whole thing was built on an assumption. We read hell in the Bible, and because in our culture hell means a certain thing, or the preacher told us hell meant a certain thing, so now every time we read the word hell, we think that that's what the Bible's talking about, when it's really talking about a valley in Jerusalem and a physical, this worldly place, not a metaphysical, otherworldly place that we go to when we die. But we make those assumptions, right? So that why question is super, super, super important. And then because you may just toss the thought out as soon as you do the why question, like there's stuff that I do and like, why did I do that? Oh yeah, that's my old programming.
Yep.
That's something my mom put in there, or my dad put in there, but it doesn't really fit with the world today, or doesn't fit with who I am as a human being, and I can just toss it. Or that's built on a faulty assumption, so let's go back and rethink and explore those assumptions.
Yep.
And none of that's possible if you don't step back and think about your thinking.
And it's funny that you mentioned that, because we were talking offline about getting into shape, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I'll sit up here here in my office. I have like some basic equipment, right? I've got an exercise wheel. I've got a push up thing. I've got this thing that allows you to do planks like a video game, which is really cool. I have all of this stuff right here at my disposal, and I don't use it. Now,
Mm-hmm.
if somebody asks me, they'll say, "Derrick, you got all this stuff in your office. Why don't you use it?" And here's my response, right? I'll try to justify. I say, "Well, I'm too stressed out with doing what I'm doing. I don't have time." Okay, so I discovered something, and I discovered this today. I was today years old when I discovered this, right? That I'm not doing something nonstop all the time.
Mm.
I'll find time to do what I want to do. Like if I get up and go to the restroom,
Mm-hmm.
when I come back here to the office, I could get down and plank for 30 seconds.
Sure.
It's only 30 seconds. Or, I could do 10 push-ups, right? 10 push-ups, what's that? Maybe 30 seconds, maybe, right?
Yeah.
So I can do these things. I'm trying to justify why I can't. And so what I'm doing here is I'm allowing situations to shape my values,
Right.
which in turn informs and influences my why.
Hmm.
So what happens there is now my why is fucked up.
Hmm.
My why is broken. And I'm doing what I can to justify my own laziness, because that's what it is.
Yeah.
So so this goes back to what you were saying. Okay, so like authentic values, right? I have a friend, um, who he was my trainer for a while, and he went a couple of SEAL classes before me. For him, physical fitness is part of his value package.
Right.
No matter what he does, he's going to find a minute to do push-ups, a minute to do burpees, a minute to do pull-ups. He is going to do something because this is ingrained in his values. And so what he's done is he's eliminated the excuses for not doing it from his value paradigm,
Yeah.
right? In order to do this, if you say, okay, I want to get into physical shape, I have to rearrange my value paradigm, which that means I have to re-engineer my why. But here's the funny thing about that, right? Because in order to re-engineer your why, you have to think about, why am I having the
Exactly.
thought in the first place, right?
Exactly.
So now I'm applying the value system that I understand that I have to this thought, but and then I have to ask myself some honest questions. Does this value serve me in the way that I want it to? If not, then I have to rearrange this. So, and it takes thinking about the thought in order to re-engineer the paradigm.
Mhm.
So that was, I mean, I'm just using a real world example and using me as this is something that I deal with. Or like let's say, for example, and I'm going to use me for an example again, right?
Mhm.
Because I'll have like a bad week and say, well, I know that I've got a shit ton of laundry that needs to be done, but I'm not going to do it because I deserve to sit on my ass right now. Well, I sit on my ass right now, and this laundry situation begins to add on. It piles on,
Right.
and sooner or later, I'm going to get to the point where it has to get done, right? But at the point that it does get done, now it's a big effort. It's a big task. It's a day long thing. All I had to do was just allocate a few minutes here and there
Right.
to get this done. So and so we go from the why to the who, right?
Exactly.
So who does this impact, right? If I don't do laundry, then what happens is that me and my wife's closet overflows with dirty with dirty clothes.
Right.
And so she goes into the closet, and she's expecting to go in there and have this closet experience, because we have this beautiful walk-in closet, and she can't have that experience. And she'll be nice most of the time and not say anything, but she'll simmer on it, right? But if I let it go long enough, it's going to become a thing, and she's going to be like, listen, dude, are you going to ever fucking wash your clothes, right? And so that impacts her, and then if she gets pissed off, right? She decides, okay, well, nobody's doing their laundry, nobody's cleaning up around here, so fuck it, I'm not going to cook, right? So now my action has bled into her action, which bleeds into the actions of everyone else in the house, and it gets to become a thing. So this is how all of these thoughts, and again, if we just take a step back, like you said, the meta step. Learning in real time, Aaron. I love this, right? Take the step back, the meta step. That needs to be a term. We need
Yeah,
to
I love it. Meta step.
hashtag the meta
Yeah.
step. Take the meta step and take a step back and say, okay, what is the bigger picture here? What is the bigger picture? Why am I having this thought? Who does this impact? How does it affect them? What does it affect? Take all of this into consideration and say, okay, do I need to change how I think about my thoughts?
Mhm.
Anyway,
Yeah, because now you're getting into the ecology of your life, right? So the who does this affect? And don't forget to leave your future. Don't forget to leave, Aaron. See, I'm catching myself thinking about my thinking.
yeah,
Don't leave your future self off the list when you're thinking about who does this affect. One of
wow,
one of my coworkers is always talking about future Aaron, or I don't want to say her name, but in my case, she'll be talking about herself. She used her name. If I don't do this today, I'm handing off a problem to future. So with the laundry, if I don't take some time to deal with the laundry right now, I'm handing off a problem to future Aaron, right? Or future
yep,
Derrick is going to have to deal with a much bigger issue if I don't do this today. Or I don't think anybody that ended up in substance abuse, or somebody with really grave, I'm thinking about grave consequences to their actions, broken relationship, or prison time, or enslaved to a substance. Like, no, people end up there because they're not doing this meta process, and they're not thinking about their future self. So this isn't just about, and I'm highlighting this because the religious crowd, or the deprogramming religious crowd that still listens to us or watches us, like, immediately I could see you getting snared into, oh yeah, I want to do this, but who's this going to affect? This is going to affect this person over here, and it's going to affect my family, and it's going to affect my sisters, and it's going to affect my friends, and all that. And we're so taught to think about loving others or whatever, that you leave future self off that list.
yeah,
Not just present self, because again, substance abuse, for present self, it's great, man. I don't have to feel these feelings. I'm just going to feel great. I'm going to go into oblivion.
yep,
But 2, 5, 10, 15 years down the road, future Aaron's dealing with the whole mess. And guess what? Future Aaron's brain and chemistry system has so adapted to the substances that I'm using that I don't get the high anymore. I have to use it to feel normal. And nobody wants that. And so that's all I want to say about the who part of that. I want to say, don't forget to leave future self.
No, dude, that's powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Don't forget to include. I keep saying leave. See, that's that religious programming.
Yeah,
Don't forget to include your future self.
yeah. I'm gonna put it back on the screen again. Don't leave your future self off the list of who's affected by your thinking about your thinking.
Right.
Right. So that brings up another point, because okay, so your future self, but also think about future relationships, right? The relationships that you have now in the future, and how does this affect relationships that will occur or be developed later on in your life? Because this is a funny thing. Like, people talk about finding a spouse, right? They
Yeah.
always talk about finding a spouse, and I've actually said this. I haven't said it exactly like you said it, but I've said, like, okay, what are you doing today to influence your future spouse tomorrow?
Mm.
Because we a lot of times we look at relationships as present tense, right? We don't look downrange. So what you were talking about, your future self, right? But your future relationships, your future business opportunities, your all of these things, you have to think about this, that how you're thinking about your
Really good point.
thinking influences, impacts, and informs all of these things downrange.
Right.
And here's the thing: none of us has a crystal ball. None of us, no,
Right.
forget, prophesy and all of that. Look, nobody knows. Nobody knows. But what you can do is you can say, okay, I'm going to set up things as best as I can based on the information that I have today.
Right.
So like when we save for retirement, for example, right? We don't know what the future holds, whether it's going to be, 200% inflation or whatever. But what we do is we set aside a certain part of our income now based on the information that we have, because we're doing the best that we can about tomorrow with the
Right.
information that we have today,
Right.
right? Or, planning for your career. Okay, I'm taking these classes not really knowing how this is going to impact me down the road, but what I know is that people who invest in continuing education today generally have better tomorrows professionally, right?
Right.
So you brought up a really good point. Don't leave off your future self, but don't leave off the future that you are going to participate in.
Right.
You have to take that into consideration. But let's say this. Okay, so like thinking, again, I mentioned earlier that people conflate thinking and consciousness, and they're not the same thing. I mean, basically, thinking says I'm going to focus in on some object, some concept, some precept, some idea, and I'm going to take this and process this in real time, right?
Mm.
So that's how I express a thought. But when I'm doing this, am I doing this just am I using my limbic brain for this? Is this autonomic? Am I on autopilot here? Or am I expressing some effort? So let's put it this way. You can tune into a frequency on a transistor radio,
Right.
right? Or you can tune in on a quartz lock Marantz receiver. You're still tuning into the same frequency, but the signal strength, the harmonic distortion, the sound quality, the clarity
Hmm.
of the signal is going to be different between these two devices. So what am I saying is that when you're exercising metacognition, you're now focusing not just on the frequency, but on the device that you're going to listen on, right? So like watch this. The iPod changed people's listening habits because now you can have 1,000 songs in
Right.
your pocket, right?
Right.
But there was a problem with that. The audio file, you know, basically MP3 or MP4 files didn't have the same, they were not what they call lossless. In
Right.
other words, there were nuances of the data of the song. In other words, metadata about the song is missing, which means that you don't get it with the same clarity as if you listen to it on a Sound Craftsman amplifier and a Marantz, preamp and you know all of
Right.
these different audiophilic components.
Right.
So one of the things that happened was that in the standards for digital music, they had different layers or different flavors of these standards. So to appeal to the audiophile, because it never really completely satisfied them. But it appealed to them and say, okay, now I can download this song. It's going to take up a little bit more space in my iPod. So I'm not going to have 1,000 songs. Now maybe I'll have like 600, but they'll be better quality. So
Right.
that's like when you're exercising metacognition, you're basically reading the metadata of the data that you process is what I'm getting at. And so how do we get people to to first examine the thought itself, right? And then second, how do we get them to dig deeper or to take that meta step backward and to observe the all of the ramifications of
Right.
the thought, right? And then make and reshape that to better influence, inform, and impact their lives. That's my question to you.
Yeah. Unfortunately, most people, at the end of the day, I mean, at the end of the day, we really are animals
Yeah.
living on this planet. What I mean by that is, for most people, and studies bear this out, this isn't just my idea or opinion, certainly has been borne out in the people that I've worked with. It's borne out in my life, but there's data there to back it up, that people aren't willing to change generally. Uh, let's put it this way. Not really willing to look at how I'm thinking until I realize my life isn't working for me anymore. And the pain of how my life is not working for me right now is great enough that I'm ready to explore how I'm thinking and make a change. Uh, and that's hard for people. So, but at the end of the day, pain. I mean, studies bear that out. So until the pain, and it could be the pain of anything. It could be the pain of just the doldrums. It could be
Uh-huh.
the pain of boredom, right? It could be the pain of, uh, we talked about this. One of the reasons for a midlife crisis is, after you've been there, done that, after a while, you get this law of diminishing returns. And so life becomes dull, or life becomes boring, or too monotonous, or whatever. And then finally there's pain in that, right? There's pain in the fact that the life has gotten boring and monotonous. And so the classic uh, midlife crisis, I've created this social self in order to try to mitigate pain and get pleasure by creating this social structure in my life. But there's always been a gap between what was going on the inside and who I presented on the outside. And now my life has become too painful to live with that gap anymore. So I just blow everything out and don't give a fuck, right? I mean, that's one example. Uh, what's ironic, though, is that if we could practice this, and this is why I love that they are teaching some of these things, at least in some schools, to kids, if we could practice this again, like we said, with regard to our future self and our future endeavors, as you pointed out, nuanced, then maybe we wouldn't get into those places as much where it's like, oh, this sucks, And so now I've got to step back, take that meta step back,
Yeah.
and I've got to examine, how did I get here? But a lot of people aren't even willing to do that because we want to blame shift. And we live in such a victim culture. And I'm not victim blaming or shaming people who have genuinely been victimized by something terrible. But when you have been victimized by your past self, when you've been victimized by your past choices,
Yep.
or you participated, maybe it wasn't 100% you, but you participated or volunteered for some of it, to be able to recognize the power to be able to change your life by taking responsibility for your life. But in our culture, it's just so easy to blame somebody else or something, or so it's hard. My answer to that question is, it's hard to get people. Excuse me. It's hard to get people that aren't trained in this to practice this.
Well, so let's break this down into baby steps, right?
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things that I was thinking about is like we think about cognition. Cognition is thinking, right? When we recognize, recognition,
Yeah.
right? Uh, we think of recognition as an acknowledgement,
Hmm.
but it's actually thinking about or giving thought to something else, right? We recognize,
Hmm.
and and so I want to talk about that for a minute, because I think that in order to have metacognition, you have to first understand recognition
Yeah.
or recognition. In other words, I have to be able to identify traits within myself,
Yep.
patterns within myself, behaviors within myself, and then also understand how these things are played out in others, right?
Hmm.
Because, for example, the narcissist doesn't see the narcissism in others. Or no, no, let me rephrase that. The narcissist sees the narcissism in others, but doesn't see the narcissism in themselves,
Right.
right? How do and I think that this is one of these things that we could do, that we could use as like a baby step. And I'm thinking about this, Aaron. I think that this is really like a coaching opportunity, um, to get to teach people how
Hmm.
to be cognizant, to recognize, and to have metacognition, right? And that all of these are steps in on the path to being a whole thinker, right? And I also think that being a whole thinker is essential to exercising critical thinking, right?
Sure.
Because one of the reasons why I think critical thinking is lost on society is because we're not taught to be whole thinkers. We're actually taught to try to be as autonomic as possible.
Absolutely.
We're not taught to be, and this is a funny thing, and I'm really glad that that we did this with our kids growing up, is that we invested tons of money in art supplies.
Mm.
You know, pencils, charcoals, erasers, rulers, protractors, French curves, modeling clay. I mean, everything, right? And we just encourage the kids to sit down and draw shit. You
Yep.
know, form shit, right? And it doesn't. There's nothing good or bad. But what it does is it forces you to think outside the box,
Right.
right? And I'll never forget when we first bought coloring books for the kids, and when I was a kid, all the teachers and instructors, they would always say, "Oh, Derrick, you've done so well. You colored all inside the lines."
Right.
And I remember one of my cousins, he used to open up a comic book, and this used to frustrate me when I was a kid. He would just take crayons and just, yeah, 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 and it looked like something, something dystopian, right? But when I look back on it, right, so my cousin today is a fashion designer.
Wow.
You know, he was on to something back then I
Sure.
didn't get, right? And I
Right.
thought that I was the artistic one. I thought that I was the creative one, but in reality, he was always outside the lines. So when my kids started coloring, I was so tempted, like, oh, color inside the lines, color inside the lines. But then I said, no, fuck it, just grab some crayons. I said, grab a fistful of crayons, right? Different colors, and just go at it.
Yeah.
So what I'm getting at is, how do we get, I mean, first of all, I think that it's essential for anybody that's watching this, right? This meta step. Remember this. Get that burned in your consciousness. Be metacognizant about the meta step, right?
Yeah.
And take the step back from what it is that you're doing, and really think about, okay, why am I doing this? Okay, I'm doing this because I thought about this. And why did I think about this? Well, I thought about this because this is what I was taught, or this is what I was conditioned. Okay, now that you've thought about all of these things, now think about why, why are you yielding to the conformity? Why are you yielding to the conditioning? Why? And then start to unpack the thought,
Yep.
right? And I'm hoping that that people who are watching this, that that they'll really, because I read something. I think Hope Anthony had posted this. Is that he basically said that there's a statistic that only 20% of people are critical thinkers. And if you think about that, right, if you metacognize that, that's a horrible statistic,
It is.
right? Because that means that most people are not really considering why they think about a thing,
Right.
or why this thing is a prevalent paradigm.
Right.
So I think that in order to kickstart human evolution, that we have to, those who think have to help those who don't, and have to do it in such a way that it's not condescending,
Right.
it's not it's not insulting,
Right.
but help in such a way that you help them to see something that they ordinarily wouldn't have, which that is the definition of leadership,
Yeah.
is helping to
True.
see people, or helping to get people see things that they ordinarily couldn't see, go places they wouldn't ordinarily go, and to do things they ordinarily wouldn't do. That's what leadership does. And
Mm.
and so I think that the thinking people of the world, and those who have an understanding of metacognition, of thinking about thinking, that they have an obligation to help others. And I have to say this, for again, this is my mea culpa, right? Because I don't always do that. I'll do that for people that I know are looking for it. But it's like the people that are not looking for it, and it's apparent that they're not looking for it. I'm like, well, fuck you, and,
Right.
and you can't do that. You
Right.
can't do that. Not if you're going to be a force for good.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a good challenge. I mean, really, honestly, I can't think of anything to add to that. It might be a good spot to end it.
Cool. Yeah, it's not a whole bunch of comments out here. If if you
Well, yeah. I'm sorry to cut you off, but it's interesting that you just gave the statistic that 80% of the people don't do critical thinking or whatever, and we're talking about critical thinking. It's exactly, you can't do critical thinking if you're not doing metacognition.
yeah,
It's a necessary step. I will say this to sum it up. I would sum it up this way. This is mine. Growing in real time, right? That metacognition has three main components to it:
uh-huh.
awareness, analysis, and application. So that's how I would sum it up: awareness, analysis, and application. We're aware of how we're thinking. We apply analytical skills, analytical thoughts. We analyze how we're thinking. And then after enough analysis, then we think about how to apply what we're thinking. So that's what I would say as my conclusion to the.
Well, with that being said, I'll go ahead and kick it to you for the close, and we can go on ahead and ride off into the sunset, man.
All right. So I'm going to lift up my last little bit of watery whiskey. And I'm going to say thank you for coming to our TED Talk. Thanks for listening and watching. Hope this was helpful for you. And Derrick, I love you and can't wait to do this again next week. And I'll get a hold of you after we're done here. And I forget the peace and hair grease. I'm just going to say cheers.
Yep. Cheers, man. Love you all.